All right, quick look at metrics because we have a busy schedule coming up. This sheet on the metrics is one thing that we've been pulling up and we've been looking at for the last calendar year. And what we drew attention to in the last call is no different. If you take a look at the average time to data cap for LDN notaries, we're still hovering at that 10-hour mark. It's going to take some time to pay down some debt on those issues that we're just really skewing the metrics right now. So I won't call too much attention, but our average time to data cap is 4 days, which is getting better. If you've been on this call for a while, you might remember this number around 6, then it got to 5, now we're down to 4. So we're really starting to see returns on the amount of notaries that are in the system. As those notaries get more up to speed and start processing, we're going to see this number get even faster. Another thing that I would point out on this slide is the amount of data cap collected to clients. The network is still growing. I like to call out if we have like a big spike or if we have a big drop. This last 2 week, pretty much steady. So we're growing at that 0.5 petabyte, which seems to be about average for our project that comes up. So nothing really to call out on this slide specifically. I sent this deck into Slack. So if you'd like to see where any of these numbers come from, you'll see that there's a link to all these slides. So if you want to go grab the metrics yourself or see how we're pulling these, that's where we're getting it from on that statistics on the Interplanetary page. All right, to the meat and potato of the call. So on the agenda today, I think we have 7 issues. Some of these are quick. Some of these might be a little bit more of a high-level discussion. So Galen will be walking us through the 6-week recap, what we've accomplished on the spring, kind of alluding to what the projects are coming up in Q3 and Q4 of the year. I'll be giving you a reminder and a foot stomp that the notary governance call for the second part of the day is shifting back 2 hours. Just want to make sure we don't leave anyone at the bus stop and that everyone's on that call that like to be. We're going to be talking a little bit about an issue in GitHub with the assignee. This was flagged from a few members of the community. There's an action that you have to take. And so Galen will walk you through the steps on what's causing that, as well as what you should see on your inbox. We'll talk about the data cap distribution, and we have a slide deck from Rajef. Then we're going to have the template for LDN exports proposals and wrap it off with LDN sealing. So again, lots of time on this call, and these are meant to be not just updates, but a lot of discussions from you as we go through. So with that, hand it over to Galen.
Thank you all. So we had a 6-week sprint. We hit some, we missed some. This was a busy 6 weeks. I'm going to talk through kind of the different ones and say, but at a high level, I would say from system status, I think we had mixed results. Volume, I think we passed overall. Speed and engagement, I think we missed, but governance and risk, I think we passed. So jumping into those as a quick recap of what our objectives were. Next slide, please. So for system status, the big things, we really wanted to implement LDN v3, which we did. It is functioning. We have successfully worked with over 90 clients and the LDN v3 flow. That said, there have been a few bugs. It's not perfect. There's a couple more tools that we still need to implement. With that, we had a specific call out around broader tooling metrics. We are getting some LDN tracking. We still have some other tools that didn't ship on time that we're working on. And then with training, I would say that on this one, we kind of missed. We had some intentions of doing some more screencasts and training sessions, and we didn't get to as many of those as we wanted. Volume, we set ourselves an ambitious goal of 200 PIBs sealed. We missed that. We're at 142. I would say that 142 is still a pretty big win for the 6-week mark. And we pretty massively passed the number of active LDNs that we set for ourselves of 175 to 202. So I consider that a win overall. Speed, though, we're still falling short by a pretty decent amount here. We are tracking TTD and reporting that now, but we had kind of this hope of once a LDN got approved to getting its first allocation, that should be 3 days. Currently on our dashboard, that's listing as 25 days. But I think that may be tracking incorrectly. I think the 25 days is from when an LDN is submitted to when it gets its first allocation. So I need to follow up on that metric. And then the days without data cap, we are still working on tracking that. So speed, not the best, and it's kind of a, an all-team effort. So no single point of failure there. Next slide, please. Engagement. We have some in-progress work that is going to ship pretty soon, but we didn't get as many of the README documentations updated. We are working with some different teams to ship some infographics and add some additional content. So I think that this is going to be useful in the future. Governance, the working group proposals, Casey is here as representative. We have heard from him a few times, along with Meg and some other folks on Enterprise Phil. So that working group is making progress and we're stoked. And from the trust and safety side of the house, we are working to increase kind of our headcount at a more long-term sustainable role. So I'd say we pass that one. Looking ahead, if we could go to the next slide, we'll do this pretty quick. This next 6-week sprint will take us through September 20th. Time flies when you're having fun. So for this one, we're going to focus on, the missed topics from above around speed and tooling and bugs. We are also really prioritizing some content revamps, putting some resources towards that. Some Ldn exceptions. We're seeing more and more of those kind of special project, proof of concept, out of band, large data sets, and we need to kind of clean up and revise a more sustainable process for how we handle those exceptions and how we as a community decide to approve them or not. There's also a couple open issues and proposals that have come through just over the past couple months that need to sort of do an overhaul, make sure everything is buttoned up. And then in mid-September, the governance team is planning another summit to sort of prep for Q4 and H1 of 2023. So our sprint priority for these next 6 weeks will also be prepping for that summit and then making sure that that summit is useful and effective. More news on that to come once we have an agenda. There'll potentially be some different open sessions where we'll invite targeted user groups to come provide some brainstorming and some design feedback. So the summit itself will not be is not kind of a conference event that would be open to the public. It is primarily for the governance team. But like I said, once we have an agenda, there will be some sessions that have kind of targeted audience invitation. So I think there were some questions in the chat that were not related to that. Okay, so that's me on the sprint update. I think next slide might also be, this is Raghav. I will let him take it from here.
Thanks, Galen. So as we've been working on a new landing page for Phil Plus clients. Right now, they are coupled on plus.phil.org, and we think that just like other on-ramps to the Filecoin network, it's going to be useful from a content perspective to have a separate landing page for clients to learn more about Phil Plus. And so we're in the very early stages of that. So as it's mentioned, as we're creating more pathways for private data, I think it could be useful for clients to learn what are the different ways, and you'll learn more about one of the proposals that we're making to help on that end later today. And finally, we're also considering adding guidance and toolings on finding SPs added to this landing page. So if anyone in the community is interested in contributing or collaborating, please DM me on Slack and we can chat further. Thanks. Yeah, I'm good.
All right, I'll speak to this one here. So we've been talking about this for a few weeks on the calls, just like one of those more reminders. This afternoon or tomorrow morning for some of you, the second governance call is going to take place at 6 p.m. Pacific, 01 UTC, and 9 o'clock Beijing in the morning time. We're going to run this for 2 sessions in August, and I'm going to compare if we get more attendance for that time slot, or if we lose a lot of the people that come to that. So if you were on the fence or you like that time slot, The best way to vote for it is with your feet and dialing into that call. There's going to be some duplication. So if you found that you came to this morning and you came to the one in this afternoon and it was all repetitive, really good feedback for us, but maybe we can catch some other people in that process. So I'll send out a quick survey at the end of August just to gather the input and see if that's something we want to make public. So I posted this in Slack. Just consider this a second reminder that the next call today or tomorrow, based off where you are, is taking place at these times. And in the slide deck, we have the shared calendar, which will bring you to a Google shared calendar where we store all of the events. If you add that, you can then follow these without all the invites every time. Makes it really helpful. So pen in any questions in chat or anybody wants to interrupt, really basic. The next call is going to take place 2 hours later. Galen, do you want to tag team or I'm sorry, did you have a question?
No, I got this one. Jumping in because this is related to a conversation that is happening in the chat right now. So in GitHub, when a client makes a direct allocation request, what it is supposed to do is assign the notary that the client chose in the front end. So that notary, it will show up for them to approve it. It will also get the notification to go into GitHub and complete more diligence. We are getting reports from some notaries that this process isn't working, that it will put the notary in sort of the body of the comment issue, but it will not assign them. And the reason for that is because the notary has to be added with triage level access to this repo. So I went through and added everyone last week, and everyone should have gotten an email. However, if you did not take action on accepting that invitation, it has now expired. So I think that there's a way for you to find that email and request another invitation. So I need you notaries to go do that and confirm. If you are not sure if this applies to you, you can also just go to the client onboarding repo and check your access level. I'm pretty sure if you sign in to the settings section, you are able to see that whether or not you have been added. So please, notaries, especially round 3, or if you are using a different GitHub than you have previously for completing these direct allocation requests, go give it a look-see. Any questions there? It looks like that link is broken, probably because you don't have permissions. Try that link, will take you to the repo, and you should be able to see if you have access or not. Right now, there are 16 pending invitations that have expired to various notaries. So you can also check in your email and search for an email for an invite. Awesome. Up next, data cap distribution. We've also gotten a couple questions on this. I wanted to speak to this for a second. The current guidance for data cap distribution for large data sets is that those clients should be engaging at least 4 different SPs, and that a single minor ID basically should not be getting more than this is worded a little strange. Sorry, I was typing this too quickly. No single minor ID should get more than 30% of a client's allocated data cap. That is our current guidance. There are some situations where a large data set has intentionally proposed that they would be working with a single SP. For example, some of the proof of concept ones, we had them say, for this client address, it's going to work with this set of minor IDs. And in those situations, those minor IDs are going to have a higher percent of data cap allocated to them. There are also cases where a client has said, we are going to work with a group of SPs. They start getting data cap, and they are only working with one minor ID. And in that situation, the notaries have in the past done exactly what they should do, which is to say, hey, wait a minute, your allocation rate is 80% to a single person. Why is that? Please give us more information. And that is part of this process, right? There may be a very justified reason. In that case, the client can say, we want to work with more, but for this first batch, we only had one lined up. Our next allocation amount is going to go to this other SP, and then our third allocation is going to go to another. Is that the ideal flow? No, because it's requiring more trust from the notaries to say, am I confident if I give this person another allocation, they will do what they said they would do? So it might be more suspicious, might be less likely to get signed. It might take longer to get signed, but these are still like programmatic guidelines where the notaries are the ones able to be empowered to make these decisions and perform this diligence. Now, that said, like, we would love for every client who is getting data kept through the large data set process to start making distributed deals and work with lots of different SPs right out the gate. We also understand that sometimes from a business operation standpoint, that isn't what happens. So again, we just want to bias towards transparency. Other current guidelines, which we've talked about a lot, is notaries should be rotating, doing the investigation and signing those allocations. We don't want notaries to sign. We don't want the same notary to sign subsequent allocations in a row. And if you go to the GitHub large data set repo and you search by label bot ready to sign, that means that that issue is ready for diligence by the notaries and ready for signatures. Either it has one proposal and it's waiting for an approval, or it is waiting for its first proposal. When I checked this yesterday, there were 50. There were 50 client applications that were waiting. And from what I could tell, a lot of those did not have, they were not waiting for the client. It was not a situation where a notary had gone to one of these, asked a follow-up question, said, this looks suspicious, said, you know, please fix the link to your website, anything like that. So they're not waiting for the client. In this case, they're waiting for the notaries. And that is what is contributing to some of those TTD numbers being in the 25 range. So these 50 show up in the large data set repo. We have the bot posting comments in Slack with links to them, and they show up in the front end for notaries to go sign. So help us understand how we can get that time to data cap number lower by checking this repo, checking those other places, checking the front end, checking Slack, landing on one of these applications, seeing if you think that, you know, it is safe enough to propose or approve a data cap allocation to the client. And if it isn't, if they're not working with a distributed group of SPs, if they don't have enough information in their application, please ask those questions, flag that in there and comment back to the client themselves so they have an opportunity to understand why they are not getting approved and they can address it. So questions, do we allow over 30% distribution in the first or second, or just need to meet 30% when the final round is over? Again, this is guidance. So it is up to the notaries to perform the diligence. If the notaries see a client, give that client their first allocation, and that client goes and uses only 2 minor IDs and has 50% distribution, or has 80% distribution to 1 minor ID, and then they are ready to make their second allocation request, it's up to the notaries to ask the question and decide, is this a reasonable situation? Are we confident that this client is operating in good faith? Do we need to flag this and call it out? Does this look normal? And that is where the guidance is that we would like distributed deal making. That is part of the intent of the large data set process, is that you have distributed deal making across regions and across minor IDs. So there is no hard and fast rule that says we will, you know, every notary will be held to exactly this standard and every client who doesn't meet this will be instantly shut off. That is not currently how the program is structured. We would like to have some flexibility so that we can learn how the program, you know, really needs to respond to these needs of the community. So the notary vote for the rules instead of giving any notaries the ability to apply. Julian, can you clarify? What do you mean by that?
I mean, like, we have a set of notaries, so can we just like agree all together of rules instead of giving just guidance? I understand that. So I mean, the Filecoin Foundation doesn't want to provide like any rules, but it's more like a community decision. But then why the notary are not like just voting for some rules that everybody can apply?
Yeah, I think that part of this is that we are still at an early point in the program. And if we have like a really specific rule, then where we're seeing right now with like all the proof of concepts, the more like specific rules we have, then the longer it takes to like figure out how to handle exceptions to those rules. But also, as the short answer is, if a notary wants to make a proposal to say, like, I propose we set a hard rule, they can like write that proposal, post it in the notary governance repo, and we can like take a vote on it. We can like discuss it in governance calls and say, you know, this notary or this group of notaries came together. They wrote a proposal that said for large data sets, you know, by your third allocation, if your percentage is this, then, you know, we're not going to give you any more data cap. Like that might be a rule that a group of notaries want to propose. And then the community could say, why don't we add this addendum? Or why don't we, you know, what about this exception? And then we could, you know, discuss it in governance calls, take a vote on it, see if it seems safe enough to implement, and then try it out. So I think that's like a great possible direction to go. But as of right now, like these are guidance because the community has not said we have ratified like this like specific rule that applies, you know, in all cases. There's a link here from Carolina. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. And the rules should be like decided by the notary or by the whole community? That's another point.
I think that's also an open question. And what we really want to see is that the whole community can add feedback and add opinions. So the whole community can come in and say, I think you are forgetting, you know, this exception, or the whole community can come and say, you know, this is going to prioritize this type of person. But fundamentally, the governance team, the root key holders, and the notaries are the ones who I think have the power to decide what to implement. So everyone in the community is empowered to like speak their mind, have an opinion, ask questions, but really it lands on the notaries, the governance team, and the root key holders to kind of make these decisions and ratify them by taking into account all of those opinions. But yes, there is the ultimate authority lies in those other stakeholder groups. Deep, did you have something?
I was just going to double down in a way where if you look at like how other communities are involving in the Web3 space and like generally how with the movement towards DAOs and stuff, there's a lot of good lessons out there on like mechanisms around like stewardship and voting and stuff that we've been doing some reading on and would love to take some learnings from and adjust to our scenario. But I think ultimately this idea that we have a open source modifiable list of criteria by which you become elected as a steward of a community, and then the steward of the community is then held responsible for voicing an opinion and presenting and pushing things in a positive direction is probably the more efficient path. But then we want to make sure that like that transition happens over a period of time where it's safe and people also feel like they got a chance to influence things in a way that they wanted.
Awesome. Were there any other questions or comments on sort of this data cap distribution? Like I said, this came from a couple questions that were showing up in Slack and a couple issues. If not, I think the next slide is for Raghav talking about some new templates.
Yeah. So one of the things that's come up is there's been a lot of applications that have private data, and then they've been sort of stuck because you know we're running the pilot with eFil Plus, but not everyone can be part of the pilot. So we've come up with a proposal here to get more information from some of these applications that are in the pipeline. Which some of it is modeled after a previous precedent that was set by some clients. And so we would love your comments and your responses to this issue. So if you can go to GitHub and please comment and see if there's no kind of opposition, we'll move ahead with this. And this will be used by our fraud analyst who sometimes helps us around analyzing incoming applications. So yeah, please go check out issue 593 on GitHub, and please leave your comments.
And yeah, that one, if you could go back one slide for a second, Karen. Thank you. So yes, so this one, 593, I posted the link to this issue, and this issue also has a pull request associated with it. I know sometimes GitHub can be like a little weird to look through, but basically if you check the pull request has a couple different commits that are in it, and you can kind of look through to see what the proposed changes are, and there's sort of a snapshot view there of that template. If you are not super familiar with GitHub and how to like look at pull requests and see what's being proposed, then I would encourage you to kind of comment that on 593 to say like, I don't really understand what's being proposed here. And then maybe someone can jump in and like put another screenshot in issue 593 as well. Just because I know sometimes, you know, non-tech people like looking through GitHub can be a little challenging. But okay, that was all I had on that. Next slide.
I can speak to this one a little bit. This one has been a long time coming. I know that there was actually originally a discussion for this, like almost 9 months ago or something, where we were looking at the ways in which LDNs could scale and the design could adjust and shift in a way that would make sense for the demand that we were seeing. This one is for issue 594, and the intent for this is, for those of you that have filled out an Ldn application, you've seen, you know, total amount of data cap being requested, and it says max of 5. And the intent is effectively to say, hey, we're seeing a lot of applications come in that actually are using a lot more data cap, and so we're having to handhold clients through owning multiple applications, and that's creating a lot of friction. It's creating friction for those that own the applications because they're having to track multiple applications, manage addresses across them, and understand where each one is at. It's creating overhead for notaries because for the same client and the same project and the same use case, you're having to sign more times over a period of time, even though they might be high trust. And so we're seeing that things are moving slower than they could be. And it's creating overhead in the actual like efficiency of how that data cap is going out to a client, in that it can create interruptions for their flow. This includes because they're stuck waiting to go get data cap, or because the application actually finished and now they're waiting for another one to go through the approval process. And the upfront approval is always slower. There's more steps in that. And even though we made efficiency gains with Ldn v3, we still have ways to go with making that even better, quicker, and easier to track. And so the intent of this change is basically to say, the design changes that have come with the third version of Ldn make it easier to justify taking on a step function increase in the amount of data cap that can be handed out at a given point in time. And because of the checks and balances and the safety baked into how much total data cap is being provisioned in the system and being made available to give out to client addresses, it's a little bit lower risk at this point in time to sort of consider expanding this. And so I know there were some conversations from folks around when this would happen. Some people talking about like looking forward to seeing this. On the other hand, some people have been totally fine with a 5 petabyte upper limit. And so I think it's worth having a discussion on the timing of introducing this kind of change and making sure it actually makes sense. And so I'd love to talk about it now for a few minutes if anybody has any immediate reactions to moving this up, or let's have the conversation in GitHub itself. The issue number is 594. But yeah, the intent is just to remove that upper bound. Move that upper bound from 5 to 25. I also do want to add that longer term, I think we should be moving away from like upper bounds of data cap requests anyway, and thinking more about utilization, and specifically utilization over time. I think determinants of whether or not a client is using and then therefore needing data cap are better reflected in how quickly it's being used, how well it's being used as defined by notaries or defined by the community, and whether or not they need more. And so moving to this idea that it's more like a subscription service that shows up when you need it and goes as long as you need it to go based on the project, I think is a better direction to go in. But that is a longer and more difficult conversation with more risks, and will also result in needing to rehash some of the philosophies around how data cap is currently created and given to clients. So in lieu of that conversation, I think this is a good stepping stone towards asking those broader questions on how is data cap being created? Is it being created at the right scale? Is the process getting more efficient for clients? And is the process getting more efficient for notaries? And I think this represents a good change in those directions. Any thoughts on this?
I think it's a good proposal.
Yeah, Wynan, you have a couple where you had to spread out the application too, right? And so hopefully this could help just combine and move things across faster.
Yep.
Okay. Anybody not okay with this or worried about this change? I'd love to hear any dissenters. Yeah, I do think there's an inherent risk because, if you increase the total amount of data cap going out per application, you also have the tranches that get bigger because the tranches are a factor of the weekly rate as well as the total amount requested. I think the worst case scenario, the maximum first tranche goes from something like 250 TIBs to like 1.25 PIBs, and that's quite a lot. So maybe we need to talk about adjusting the tranche logic to have something smaller upfront, or get more comfortable with the tooling that's work in progress right now with removing data cap from client addresses, and that should give us some safety as well. But overall, for like the higher trust applications that are coming that are not private, not encrypted, easier to show progress, easier to show justification for work, I think that this would be a good unblocker for moving forward. Well, anyway, see you in the issue 594. Join the conversation in GitHub. Thank you so much. Thanks for pasting the link, Galen. Okay, handing it back to Kere.
Kere, you're still muted.
Look at that, doing this 2 years after pandemic, and I'm still talking with the mute. I think what I was saying is this is a rare time where we have quite a few minutes for anything that might be on your radar. So this is like an open forum, your time. Whoever unmutes first, we'll just do hands, questions, issues, anything you would like to discuss and bring up. This is your time.
All right. So I have one question about the permissions on GitHub for when adding notaries to the large dataset repository. Do we know if that raises any issues for privacy or security for like opening or closing or changing, deleting or anything for pull requests or other
issues not
related to
they get triage level access. They don't get write or manage. So they could submit a PR, but they can't. And they could approve other PRs, but I'm pretty sure that at triage level access, you don't get the ability to merge PRs.
All right.
It is a good call out, though. I mean, it's one of those other things where it's like we're adjusting to the fact that we want to use a tool that's open, and GitHub is what we have right now. I think that in general, if there is risk around that, there are ways to mitigate it. A good example of this, Alexandra, is also that we're looking at better audit trailing for actions that take place on GitHub, so we can track like who's doing what in the repo, for example, and how we can leverage that to gain a better understanding of like actions being taken by different entities and the likelihood of building versus breaking trust, basically. And so I think we still have more to learn and more to leverage, but not a bad starting point.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, guys.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, can I ask just a quick wonder here? So when I check the notary list, I noticed some of them, they are involved in certain projects as SPs. So I just a quick wonder, as notary and SP, is it reasonable for them to keep granting DC to other SPs working on the same project with them? Like, is there any verse that they should avoid this kind of situation, or it doesn't matter at all? That's what I was wondering. And it's quite confusing, I would say.
I have some thoughts on that. I think it's a good question. We're seeing that a lot, especially with LDN applications that are going through this like private and encrypted loop as well, right? Where it's like you get a subset of notaries. Some of those notaries are also SPs, and they're signing data cap, and it's being allocated back into one of their SP operations. I think in general, what we've learned is that it's really hard to identify all of the links between every SP and every notary. And so I think as we continue to do that better, we'll be able to create better guidance and policies around this. But I think the official stance today is actually one of transparency rather than one of like restriction, where effectively it's you're a notary, you might have an SP operation you're associated with, you're signing in clients that you think are verifiable by the community and by yourself. Some of that data cap might be stored back with an SP operation that you're associated with. In the case that you're doing that for a direct allocation, that is a violation of like your terms as a notary. And the idea there is that you shouldn't be the sole determinant of whether or not somebody is trustworthy when they're just going to store deals with your operation, because that is an obvious conflict of interest. And so those we flag.
That's actually what I saw, like
indirect allocations, not LDNs.
Yeah, it's Antarctic, I think. Like they post Holland or Picnic, I don't remember which one exactly it is. They have their notes on, and the notary from Holland will keep assign it. So I don't get the point of it. Is it very reasonable? So I'm very confused by the fact that what they did. So
yeah, I just want to separate out two different things here. The first is that for direct allocations, direct is when you're applying to a single notary, and a single notary is determining your trustworthiness. So that's when you go to the client onboarding repo. And so for those ones, in the disclosures for notaries, when you sign up to be a notary, you agree to not do that, and we track those separately. And so those end up in the client onboarding repo. There's a link from Galen. In the case of Antarctic and several other applications where we see links between notaries and clients, a lot of them are going through this path of the large data sets where you have multiple notaries and it's a completely public application process, right? In the direct one, you don't know necessarily the details between what the interactions are between the notaries and the clients. You're expecting the notaries to make good decisions. And so in those cases, it's very hard to know what the relationships are. And so we just say, don't do it. On the LDN front, there's a little bit more transparency where like organizations can talk about who they're choosing to work with on the SP side, who the notaries are, and what work is actually being done. So I think the guidance that we had initially agreed on, I think as a community, now it's a little bit old, so maybe we should talk about it. But about 6 months ago, when this conversation came up, I think the general thinking was effectively that if multiple notaries are involved or the community is involved, it is a little bit okay if there's transparency in the operation. So it's like Holon in this case, Holon is a notary, but also an SP operation. Holon should be minimizing their activity on like the LDNs that are being stored with Holon for short, but on average, that project should be distributing data cap across multiple SPs. This should be completely transparent. The community should feel that they know what's happening. And if they don't, I think it's totally reasonable to highlight this, flag this, and say, hey, this doesn't seem to be good. We don't actually have good proof of work here, or it looks like the work being done is not good or trustworthy or valuable from a Phil Plus standpoint. And so in that specific case, I would encourage you to just check the GitHub issues, take a look. And if you think that the on-chain actions that are taking place, you're not supportive of, please put a comment. Let's have the conversation transparently and loop in all the right people. I think in general, we should talk about making information more available, being more transparent, being more clear about what dependencies people are taking on each other and what the existing incentives are and the relationships are. And so that would be good.
Yeah, I do understand this kind of situation you're talking about, but like the requirements for Ldn is like 4 notaries, right? If there's 1 notaries plus SP, they involved in the project directly, so it would only require like 3 notaries, right? So I think the bar is a little bit too low. I don't know how you guys think about it. Like if you compare this to the V2 period, I think it was like 25% of the whole notary in the scale. But right now, 4 notaries out
It's
of
too small. I see what you're saying.
54, I think, or 50 something.
I think it's a good point.
Less than 10%. I don't think it's
We should
fair.
increase the bar. Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
The transparency is not enough from what I saw. But yeah. I just want to share it. I actually share some. I actually share some of my opinions in the issue. Increasing the numbers of notaries. I think Sunny's coming proposed that. I think it literally makes sense. Literally from every single angle that I could possibly think of, it makes sense. I literally suggest everyone to have a look and share your opinions on that. I think it will improve the transparency literally from a very good point and perspective.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So the reason the 4 existed as a requirement originally was because we wanted to have consecutive allocations signed by different notaries, but we can definitely adjust the tooling. And I think that overall the idea is good. The proposal makes sense. We should seriously consider it. I think we can follow up on the issue originally posted by Sunny is coming. Let's continue the conversation. Thank you so much for sharing this today.
No worries. Thank you.
If you have a link, by the way, to the proposal from Sunny that you can share here, it might be easier for other people as well to see and follow up.
I just dropped that one. That's 587.
Oh yeah, there it is. Cool. Thank you very much.
One of the issues that came up in chat, just to have this for the record, anybody watching it, was the 4th round of elections. So to kind of put some dates on that, these are very tentative. With the election process, it's quite significant on the prep to get ready for it, actually doing it, scoring it, and setting everybody up. So we're in the process of gearing up for that right now. The pin that we have in the calendar is to open that election up for applications in that window sometime around November, December. Then that way we can score it during that time period. When we come back at the start of the new year, begin onboarding those new notaries. So if you're curious about the 4th round of election, it's still TBD, but we are working to have one kick off in late Q4 of 2022. And we'll continue to update that as the dates get closer and we get more progress on it. Yes, Irma, I see your hand. Floor is yours.
Hi, Kevin. Hi, Galen. And hi, Deep. Can you hear me? Oh, yeah. I'm Irma from Untitled Labs, and I want to say something about the proposal for us, the proposal of the tracking. I'm sure that you have all seen the proposal, and we want all entries, or no matter the community, the guys from the community can join us to make some comments, no matter you support or have some ideas. So we want to move forward as soon as possible. And if you have any thoughts and some comments, you can we can talk on the GitHub. And we want the other notaries can give us some feedback.
Yes, thank you, Irma. I posted that link 571 where we had the discussion. Looking forward to hearing from some more.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. I don't see any other hands. So we can call it a few minutes early.
Yeah, that's a rare thing. Anybody who joined the line late, you might have missed this Airtable link. So we're going to put it one more time. This is really important. You might have got a DM from me saying like, hey, these were the sessions that I had you attending. And what we do is I pull off this link. I also take screenshots of everybody that's on the call. So please fill this out. We will definitely be putting this in the SLA that we go through. It's just your way to document your participation in this. So if you haven't done so, this is very important. Thank you for doing it, and we'll get you registered in. One thing that I'm going to leave for offline and not take the time is we had an LDN submit a video to try to get movement on their project. So essentially the link here that you'll see for iPoloverse, it's LDN 538. It was opened about 2 weeks ago, and they made a 5-minute video to answer any of the basic questions that you may have for reviewing their application. It's been reviewed by the bot, and it's now waiting for triage. So I'll also point this link into the application review and share this in the Notary channel. But this is just an application that's taken those steps. They're very communicative, and they're just looking for a notary to review and ask them for any additional follow-up. So I will share their video shortly in the channels. But just again, here, this is ready. And if you're looking for something to sign, these people are ready to have your eyes.
Thanks, everyone. See some of you in a few hours.
Thanks, everybody. See ya.
Hi, guys.
Well, welcome to this new time slot. 2 hours later, we'll be asking for some feedback on this later in the call. But this is the 15th Notary Governance Call of 2022. Wow. And August 9th. And let's kind of take a look at what we're going to talk about. So just like the call this morning, and just like kind of the agendas, if this is new for you, we try to break this call into 4 segments. The first is just a hello, intro, quick overview of some people if you need questions or help. The second is we'll briefly talk about metrics. And then third, we'll talk about some of the issues that were brought up from the community during the past 2 weeks. And then as time allows, we'll afford anything that's not currently on the agenda for discussion. So if there's anything you'd like to talk about, as always, we'll incorporate the chat or raising your hands on this call as we go. So with that, very friendly hello. My name is Kevin, and along with the governance team, which is Deep, Galen, and Rajef, we make up anything that you may need for support and help throughout the Phil Plus program. So we're active in the Slack channels. So if you're curious, we always post that in the YouTube link. And if you have any questions, please reach out to us via GitHub or Slack. We'll be happy to help you with whatever you need. If you're joining the call, one thing that we do ask that makes it really, really helpful for communication is making sure that you adjust your name and adding your organization, whether it's the storage provider, the notary that you represent, or just the organization. That way, when we're asking questions, we can be like, oh, hey, iPhone 13, or hey, Galen with Filecoin Foundation. So if you made that one little change, it goes a long way for making it able to help you and go back. For the notaries that are on the call, we're about to drop this link. This is just linking back to that SLA for your input and time on this. Thank you for filling this out. I've been sending these out in DMs. So if there's any sessions that you've missed, please just let me know. Hey, Kevin, I was actually on that June 25th call. I usually take a screenshot, so I'll be happy to go back and just say, yep, I see you on the call. And this is why having your Zoom name actually linked to you makes it so much easier. Like, yep, got you on the call. So as always, thank you for filling that out. Galen's got that in chat, and we'll mark it down. So with that, let's take a look at some of the metrics. This comes from the Interplanetary Stats page. Those of you that have been on 15 of the last 15 calls, this will look very familiar. I think the call outs that we'd like to make on this one is that we're looking at 3 big caveats as we start to work towards our sprint, which Galen will talk about. And the first one's the average time to data cap. We're getting a lot better at this. Back when the year started, this was hovering around 5 or 6 days. And now with the increase in notaries and the increase in pings, we're seeing this slowly start to tick down. So thank you very much. This number, the average time to data cap for LDNs, we've talked about this on the last 2 calls, and we've identified some of the reasons why this is unnaturally high. That 10 number is influenced by some really old issues that are still hanging around, and we've been working behind the scenes to kind of close those out. And once they do, we'll get back to a true number, which is still around that 4, 5, 6 days. We're trying to keep that going. The average time to first response, we're still at that 5-day mark. We'll talk more in probably the next call about some ideas we have to make the filter bot more actionable, to make the more pings, and making that GitHub issue a little bit easier. We'll talk about that on this call for you. The last thing I'd kind of highlight for those of us that are in this network quite a bit is we still have very solid growth. So if you look at the total data cap allocated to clients 2 weeks over 2 weeks, we're still chugging along at that 0.5 increase, which is nice. Not too rapid, not too small, just kind of in that Goldilocks, steady, sustained growth. So if you want to see any of these metrics, this slide deck is linked in Slack. So feel free to grab that off Slack and come through. Or if you want any of the links, they're also in the deck. So if you want to follow along with anything. So with that, we have a lot of open issues to kind of get through. The big 7 is Galen's going to walk us through a 6-week recap of where we are in the sprint, what we kind of got done, what are we looking at for the next cycle. We're going to have an update on the landing page update. 2 updates in one sentence, that doesn't make sense. But anyways, we'll talk more about that landing page and go forward on it. We'll be talking a little bit about this time, making sure that this is working. Remember, this is a pilot for the month of August. I'll pull the numbers and see if we have a lot more participation or a lot less. Get feedback. Are we interrupting dinner? Are we making this easier on your morning? So we'll talk about that a little bit. There is an issue with GitHub we'll talk about. Thank you for those of you that flagged this via DMs. So we'll talk about the solution in case you're having the same issue to walk it through. We're going to walk through a lot about the data cap distribution. I know it says it on the screen, but we'll take a lot of time to talk about that between Galen and Deep. And then we have a template for the LDN proposals. I think where Jeff was talking about that one, and then the LDN ceiling. So it's a full house. This morning we used all but 5 minutes. So we'll probably kind of go the same and kind of get you what you need. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Gail.
Thank you. Yes, I noticed a typo on that previous slide. I put 6 weeks spring, but I think I got it fixed in the other slide deck. Sorry about that. So believe it or not, it is now August. We have had a phenomenal 6-week sprint running through these. The system status, I think that we are kind of mixed. I'll talk more about these individually on the next slides, but I think volume, I would give ourselves a pretty good check. Speed and engagement were the 2 that I think out of all of these we missed the most. And then governance and risk, I think we did pretty well. So if you could click into the next slide for me, please. We had set some pretty high standards for ourselves to try and get LDN v3 implemented. I would say that this is mixed success. It is functioning with over 90 clients. There has been a couple different bugs that we were investigating and a couple different extra sort of tooling features. But at a high level, I would say that LDN v3 is working and it is flowing. We also set some ambitious goals for ourselves to have some new tooling. Again, that was mixed. We successfully got the LDN tooling and some of the LDN tracking out. If you go to the Interplanetary dashboard, you'll see a new large data set kind of allocation page. We've also been launching some new TTDs, but some of our other tools that we thought were going to ship by now, we've had some hurdles getting those out the door. And then with trainings, I had kind of wanted us to have a couple more sort of screencasts, training sessions and explainer videos, and those just hadn't made it up enough to the priority list. That said, with volume, we did have a pretty, I would say, overambitious 200 PIV sealed data cap goal. We missed that as of yesterday. It was 142. Still an incredible amount of progress in 6 weeks. But we blew away the number of active approved LDNs. So we gave ourselves a target of 175, and we are currently seeing 202 active large data sets. With speed, we'll talk about this. I think we talk about this a little bit later in another section as well. We were able to kind of launch and implement the TTD tracking. But that said, we kind of set ourselves this target of from when a application gets approved by sort of the trust and safety and governance pass to when it gets their first allocation. We would like that to be down to 3 days. Currently, as we're reporting it, we're at 25 days. I think this stat is not totally accurate because I think the stat that we are reporting as 25 days is from when the application is submitted to when it gets the first allocation, but still longer than we want that to be. And then days without data cap, we wanted this to be 0. We don't yet have a great tracking mechanism for that is launched in public, but our goal there was once a client has gotten data cap, they do not run out. That said, I think that we have done better with that compared to where we were at the beginning of this year with large data set clients getting closer and closer to running out. I think the subsequent allocation bots have helped. And I think the increased allocation steps, the tranche calculations, I think those have also helped. So next slide, please. On engagement, we wanted to do some more kind of content documentation overhauls. I would say that we missed this, but it is in progress. I'll talk about that in a second. Governance, we have these working group proposals. The enterprise working groups making progress. We have heard on these calls from that team. We're seeing proposals in the governance repo. So work is being done in that direction. And then we are increasing some headcount for trust and safety and risk roles on the Filecoin Plus side of the house. So all things considered, I think that in the past 6 weeks, we did pretty well. Looking ahead, Kayra, if you could click for me. The next sprint should take us to sort of the end of September. I want to focus on the previous areas where we missed, specifically around speed and then some of the tooling and bug reports, but then also really focusing on some content revamps. We'll hear more about that. Some of the Ldn exceptions. We've gotten a lot of new kind of out of band proof of concept large data set applications. And, you know, we want to kind of clean up our process for that, have like a little bit better of a stance and guidance from for the community as to like how we're going to handle those proof of concepts and feel like we're doing a good job of tracking and holding ourselves accountable to what we're approving. We've also got a couple open issues and proposals. Some have been made, you know, a long time ago and have been sitting without necessarily getting cleaned up. So just need to sort of tidy up some of our open proposals, go through, find some of the discussion topics and see what we can kind of close out and archive. And the governance team will be prepping for another summit. Current timeline for that is mid-September. We've done 2 of these in the past. These are for the governance team themselves to get together. But that said, we will, once we have an agenda, we'll have a couple sessions where we want to invite various like stakeholder groups. So this is not the same thing as like a conference. This isn't like Phil Austin or a conference where we would kind of publicly announce this like Filecoin Plus Day and include everyone for the whole run of show. This is more for the governance team to get together and kind of work on Q4 and H1 tactical and strategic work. So with that in mind, like I said, as we get closer to it and we have a better sense of the agenda, we will work on sending some invites out. That's all I've got on this sprint recap and then prepping for the next sprint. If there are no questions and I don't see any hands, then we will move swiftly on.
Yeah, so I can talk about this. So right now, so from the perspective of clients, everything stays on plus.phil.org. And what we want to do is create a landing page for clients new to Phil Plus who want to use Phil Plus to onboard data on the Filecoin network, similar to Web3.storage and NFT.storage. So this work is in progress. We're in the early stages of defining the content as well as the UI of what that would look like. As we're coming up with new pilots for private data, this will also clarify for new clients as to what they can do if they want to become part of the program, as well as there's consideration to add guidelines and existing tools that exist within the ecosystem on finding SPs and some of the strategies around that. So if anyone in the community is interested, please ping me on Slack, and I can get you involved. And yeah, if you have any questions as well, please let me know. Thank you.
Right. I'll talk about this one. So the meeting times, as we all know, we're 2 hours later. So we're going to try this for 1 month. What I'm going to do is I'm going to send out a survey to everybody who filled out the Airtable form. I'll probably wait about a week, let it kind of sink in, and I'll be asking, is this time more conducive or is this time more of a burden? And I'll try to ping some of the folks that may have dropped off, see if that was just schedules or if this meeting made it more complicated. So just going to be asking for feedback. For those of you that are on the call, it looks like you must have grabbed this calendar from Slack or just read those updates. But if you haven't already followed the Filecoin shared calendar, it's a shared Google, and that will have all the times updated so you can see that coming through. And then after every election, I'll ask if you'd like to have your email added to that and have the direct invite sent. The reason we don't do that off cycle is because of spam. We're trying to minimize that. The way Google works is every time we add someone to the calendar, it sends you a ping. So we found that doing that off cycle was just a kind of nightmare. So we have this shared calendar. After that, all the notaries will be invited if you want to have that on your direct email. So stand by for any feedback. Really looking forward to hearing if this time works. Galen, would you like to talk about the features?
Yes, I will talk about this GitHub Assignee issue. So this has been cropping up a couple times. We've gotten reports about it. I'm pretty sure that we've tracked down the root cause of this. This is for direct allocation requests. This is nothing to do with large data set requests. Basically, the GitHub Notary accounts need to be added into the client onboarding repo at the triage level. And so I, last week, manually went through all of the notaries and the GitHub accounts that you had provided us. Had sent an invite. At this time, there are 16 invitations that are either pending or have expired because they went out and were not accepted last week. So the action here is basically you need to make sure in this client onboarding repo, which I just dropped in the chat, that you have triage level access. And if you are not sure if this relates to you, go into your email where you receive your GitHub emails and look for some kind of invite pending or client onboarding invitation to collaborate type of email. If you are a notary and you are looping through and you notice that you got mentioned in an issue, but it was not assigned to you, let us know. It is probably this issue that we're talking about, and we may need to like manually send you that invite again. So that's the action there. I see, yes, there's a couple people that are still not getting any direct requests, but also we are not getting nearly as many direct allocation requests overall. And so this has been kind of an ongoing question of, as the large data set pipeline grows and increases, does it make sense to maintain the tooling for this direct allocation process? Do we want to kind of look at that differently? There's also an opportunity, James, Charles, others on the call, if there is a large data set that you have some questions about or that you are waiting to get moved through the pipeline and filled, you could reach out to that client and encourage them to put in a request with you and say, hey, like, I don't know what you're going to do. Come ask me for 50 TIBs and get started. So there's also that opportunity for notaries to do that matchmaking as well. But moving along, I don't see any hands about this GitHub Assignee issue. Up next, we've got conversation about data cap distribution. So this one got a little bit more conversation in the morning. It has been asked a few times in regards to large data sets, what the specific rules are of the program, especially around how much data cap should be distributed to different clients. At this time, these are very much written as guidelines. And the intent here is that we, the community, understand that there are times when there are exceptions and times when these guidelines may not apply. And that is where the role of the notary is to have an amount of decision-making autonomy to some extent within this kind of system. And there is not necessarily a one-size-fits-all set of rules that work. So the current guidance, just as a reminder, is that for large data sets, clients should be engaging at least 4 different storage providers. And if they are doing that, then a single storage provider ID should not have more than 30% of a client's allocated data cap. This one specifically, we've seen instances where we have a specific proof of concept where we say with transparency, this client is going to work with this storage provider and this miner ID. And in those situations, their distribution is going to be greater than 30%, but that's because that was what was transparently communicated from the beginning. We have also seen situations where a client gets 1 or 2 allocations and disproportionately works with a single miner ID or storage provider. And the notaries, before signing the next allocations, flag it and say, hey, what's going on here? You've got 60% or 80% with a single miner ID. And that's what we want. That's an example of the process working, because then the client has the opportunity to come back and say, well, I've just really struggled finding other storage providers to work with. And then we can say, great, well, we're not going to approve this, until you come back to us with a list of some storage providers. There's a ton out there that want to work with you. This is not a good enough, explanation. Or sure, we're going to approve this allocation so you have some more, but we really need to see in this next allocation round that you add some new miner IDs. So that's where the notaries have the power to engage with that client to say, what's going on here? Additionally, we want those notaries to be rotating as they do their investigation and signing. So just a reminder, we want 2 notaries to investigate and sign the first allocation, 2 different notaries out of that pool of 50 to do the second, and then it could be the first 2 come back, or it could be 2 more. More is always better. With that in mind, there's a couple places where we are trying to notify the notaries of the applications that are ready for that investigation. We keep hearing that, the process takes too long, that 25 days to get an allocation is too long, the process is too slow. So currently, we have a Slack bot that posts and lists out the open applications and links to them. We also have the front end at plus.phil.org where you can go and see all of the ones that are available and ready to sign. And you can go to the large dataset repo itself and search for this label, bot ready to sign. And you will see all of the open issues that are ready for diligence and ready for those signatures. As of yesterday, there were 50. And I spot checked some of them, and a number of them had maybe 1 proposal, but we're just sitting there. There was no question. They've been waiting for 20 days. The notaries haven't looked at it to ask anything of the client. So to me, that's kind of a breakdown where the client is just waiting. The notaries maybe have concerns, but have not asked them. So the client doesn't know why they're waiting. It has all the right labels. Like, this is a situation where all the bots and all the tooling is working correctly, and yet it's not getting any attention. So my challenge to the notaries on this call, is go check that large data set repo, go check that Slack bot, and go check the front end and look at a application that you don't recognize and see if it looks safe enough to try to say, like, yeah, this gives me enough information. I feel like I can approve this request. Or ask the question. If you read it and you're like, I really don't understand what they're trying to bring to Filecoin, please ask that, because that is just going to give the client the opportunity to know they are getting attention and that there are questions for them to dig into. Some of the conversation this morning was around why don't we have a rule, or what would it take to have a rule that says, no more than 30% distribution. And And really, it's would be up to the community. So if a notary believes that that is the direction we need to take, they can write that proposal, and then the community can say, in order to, you know, present it in a governance call like this, share it, talk about it. Our goal here is that we have an open community where everyone can ask questions and voice opinions, but that the ultimate sort of decision-making process will be happening by the notaries, the governance team, and the root key holders. And so if a group of notaries believes that we need to set some kind of firm, you know, more than a guideline, but an actual rules as written, we encourage the notaries to draft those and present them to the community for discussion. So with that, don't know if there are any questions. I don't see any hands or anything in the chat. So if not, we will move forwards.
So with this one of the challenges has been that we don't really have a great way for clients who have private data or encrypted data to move faster in the application process, and not everyone can become part of Filecoin Plus and the pilot that we're running. So what we're proposing here is an Ldn Exceptions template that allows to capture more information to help the notaries assess applications and move those applications along to unplug the process. Some of this is based after some of the previous examples that have been done in the community. And so things like, you know, understanding who's the data owner and who's the onboarding agent would help the notaries to make a more informed decision. So at this point, we would invite you to please go to this issue 593. Please leave your comments and any discussions that you have. We're more than happy to message me on Slack as well. And yeah, looking forward to getting this issue up and running.
James, what was your question?
It was related to this slide where so we'll take, you know, notary should take a look at those 50 LDNs that are waiting. On the other hand, where's the best place to message the governance team if we're waiting on the beginning part?
Great question. So I think what we're trying to do basically is right now we have like a process where we check about once a week and go through the entire set, and we're escalating or we're pushing the ones through with a focus on escalating the private and encrypted ones, because they become like a little bit more like babysitting oriented. But I think in general, like we probably need to re-index towards like the simpler ones, because that's where the throughput needs to come in. So we actually have somebody on our team that we've added to our roster to work with us to help support some of this stuff. And then in general within ourselves as well, we're sort of removing the burden just from Galen. Like if you look at all those applications, a lot of them just come in and it's like Galen's actually the only person at some point that could push those through. And now we've sort of configured it so like as long as one of us can self-assign ourselves to the issue, we can also push this through. And so we're experimenting with like organizational like burden distribution to say like, can we get a little bit more traction like every day or every other day to like cut that loop down to like below 2 days ideally. And so I think right now your best bet is actually probably to flag this in the Filecoin Plus channel or the Filecoin Plus app review channel, and we're going to try and build automation to make that go faster. And then between us, I think we're going to experiment with something in this next sprint that hopefully will speed those things up significantly, starting like tomorrow. So yeah, Kevin, is there anything else you want to add to that, or anything you'd flag?
No, I think that's accurate. We are getting something like 2 to 4 new ones a day. There are now like 340 open large data set applications. And so just the pace continues to balloon faster than we can investigate them. And I think I also want to like flag here that part of the reason we added this step of the governance team looking at them, there were a couple things that we were seeing where applications were coming in missing information, and an idea was that the governance team could like catch those easy early checks. There were also a couple of situations where we only started to notice patterns when we had like 1 or 2 people looking at everything that came in. And so the notaries may drop in and a notary may look at a handful of applications, but by me looking at everything that was coming in at a time, I started to see like suspicious, interesting patterns of overlap. And I also started to see gaps in some of the questions. So there was that reason. And the like final reason is we were seeing, applications that would get approved, but then be, similar to where we are now, which is they'd be sitting for a long time waiting and clients were not sure what was happening. So we haven't really quite solved that problem and we're still stuck in that boat, but there is a world where we may want to revise and remove the sort of step of the governance team needing to review these at all and make that a purely automated process that just says, is the application fully filled out? Does it have all the fields? Capture address and requested amounts, as long as the address and requested amounts match a certain set of parameters, send it to the notaries. Because the other change that we have made with V3 is we no longer need to wait for a root key holder to take action on every application that comes in. And that was kind of the other barrier to this level of automation, was in the previous flow, each application needed to get a double root key holder signature, and that just also had to be batched. So now that we don't have that world with the V3 process, we can move to more automation to get the number from when they come in to when they're in front of a notary as a much tighter turnaround.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Galen. That makes a lot of sense.
Cool. I can speak to this one. So just a little bit of background. A lot of you know that when you apply for data cap today via the Ldn process, there's a limit of 5 petabytes. And a lot of the people actually, especially in this call today, but of course also the one in the morning, like more active participants, SPs doing substantive amount of business development, or those of you working on large scale enterprise onboarding cases to Filecoin, have made it pretty clear that the 5 petabyte upper bound is small. And the way we get around that today is either we see people having sequential applications, like as you're running out of one, you apply for the next application, or we see people opening up applications in parallel to try and solve this problem to reduce being rate limited. But effectively, even though that sort of works, it comes with significant additional overhead. So specifically, number one, there's like just the operational, like even what we just talked about with James, right? There's like, oh, you need to loop in a different kind of stakeholder just to get this thing progressing. Number two is like the tranche allocation logic doesn't really end up working out if you're like coming in with a new application. So we have a manual way to override this now to like increase the tranches for like a subsequent like application that would come in. But that's also like overhead and like code we have to maintain and like additional logic that has to be created. It also means your notaries need to be engaged more often, because by keeping the total max data cap requested lower or like artificially lower, your tranche size is also limited. And so you have like these more frequent needs to interact with clients, and you have you're unable to get like an actual uninterrupted tap of data cap for onboarding, and projects are getting interrupted. And so when we initially shipped Ldn v2, actually, we made this call to leave it at 5 with an explicit intent to say, hey, at some point we should move it up. And the proposed number at that point was like, why don't we move towards 20 or 25 petabytes at some stage? Now with Ldn v3, because there's a lot more, let's say, the gap between the total amount of data cap being created and what's actually in the system is much closer together. I think it's relatively safe for us as a community to experiment with increasing the upper bounds for this. And so I'm basically just proposing that let's increase the max data cap requested from 5 to 25 petabytes. I do think there's a couple of risks with this. We have untested code that's still work in progress for tooling to remove data cap from clients. So we're working on making that a little bit more mature. And I think Raghav and Galen are working on a couple of use cases and specific scenarios to test data cap removal from a client side in the coming weeks. And so that should help build some confidence that if too much data cap goes out by accident, we can still address it. And there's also that, with the 5 petabyte thing, what we noticed is a ton of projects would just ask for 5. It doesn't even matter if it's real or not. They're just asking for 5 and then inflating the bounds. And so when you make that number much, much higher, it will be interesting to see how people in the community react and how applicants are able to leverage the ability to get substantively more data cap. And so I think we'll have to keep a close eye on this. It might even be worth like running it as like a scope pilot where we say, hey, let's try this. Let's watch more closely how it goes over the next like 2 months or 3 months, and see if it's like causing any significant concern and maybe even want to undo this. But personally, I think it's still worth pitching and like considering seriously to unblock a lot of the large scale projects that are coming along. And so, yeah, pitching into the community. Would love to hear your reactions. If you're here live and you have any thoughts, please share them now. If you are watching this recording, head over to issue 594 and please drop your thoughts in the GitHub issue itself. Anybody have any thoughts on either of those issues? I know we moved back to the slide before, but on either that or the template for Ldn exceptions.
Was just about to mention that this template for Ldn exceptions it mentions private data encrypted. How does this work with enterprise fill?
Great question. Yeah, I definitely see this as purely just a stepping stone and slight like standardization of the process today. In lieu of us having like a pilot for eFill Plus, which KZ and the team are working on, which should show up in the next like several weeks. Until then, what's happening today is like people open up an Ldn application, then they get told, go open up a Notary governance repo app proposal. All we're trying to solve for is, hey, let's just standardize that thing that you're opening up in the Notary governance repo. And then by adding these fields as explicit checkboxes, what we're hoping to do is say, let's make the data collection way easier for the enterprise Fill Plus working group to go and easily scrape through this and say, oh yeah, like we had to deal with like 10 of these kinds of exceptions in the month of August and September, let's say. And 8 out of 10 were because they were private, 4 out of 10 required an NDA, and 10 out of 10 were coming via a proxy or like an agent. And like that should just help with some of the program design as well. And so this isn't changing the process. This isn't doing anything instead of eFill Plus. All it's doing is standardizing sort of the ad hoc. Maybe I can even say this is like the V0.5, right? Which is like the pattern that we've fallen into. So why don't we standardize that into the V0.9 while the eFill Plus working group puts together the V1. James, does that make sense?
Yeah, and this is what this is just formalizing the hoops that you have to jump through for this.
Correct. Yeah. Right? So all the ones that Seal's opened up, like Project Beacon, there was like that one from DSS, Victor Chang data sets in Australia. So there's already been like 5 of these. We're probably gonna get. We definitely have seen several more. Actually, it's just that we're still waiting for confirmations from those clients to confirm the questions that are being asked by like Sunny and by the rest of us on the team. And so once they're able to actually validate that, then we need to be able to say like, hey, go open this thing up or go follow these instructions. And in order to do that, having a template to point people to is easy. Yeah. Raghav, I'm not sure. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I think that covers pretty much everything. As they mentioned, this is not replacing eFill, but it's in the as we are ramping up and learning more about the insights, it's easier to make changes to this way from the learnings that we're having from eFill Plus on the go than waiting until the pilot ends and then proposing a change. So that's really the intention here.
Well, that was all of the new content that we wanted to brief that was flagged in the repo. Was there anything else that people wanted to either bring up that we've discussed and want to call back, or raise any new issues for discussion with the time that we have?
Hi, Kevin. I just wanted to mention something about code of conduct. I think there's some really great improvements that you were working on, especially these capturing these exceptions, some of the process stuff Galen talked about. But I noticed some of the dialogue in these issues sometimes gets a little out of hand. Is anyone moderating this, or is there a code of conduct we can point people to? Like, this is not, shouldn't be a name and shame exercise. Like, it doesn't sit well with me, and I'm sure it doesn't sit well with a lot of other people as well. Yeah, is there anything we can do to hold ourselves account to a little more respect in the comms?
Yeah, I think by default, everything in the Filecoin community should adhere to the Filecoin community code of conduct, which is like a default sort of moderation guideline that applies to Slack, applies to GitHub, and applies to all the different places. I think from a Fil Plus governance standpoint, our stance has typically just been to try and keep things within the bounds. And if we see stuff that's like extremely flagrant, like we've erred on the side of like reaching out more privately and asking people to sort of take it down a notch. I think only in very extreme situations have we had to waive like, hey, you need to like comply with this, because otherwise we're not gonna like, have you participate. Because I think in general, building an open community, especially in a place where you can create new accounts like on the fly, we want to make sure that people do feel included and have the opportunity to voice their frustration as well. But yeah, I mean, definitely open to formalizing the process a little bit more, or like maybe even reviewing the code of conduct together, or making that part of like the onboarding process for notaries, or for part of like the client applications or something like that, where we link off to it. Like, I think it's a good idea to just have it as a helpful reminder. So I appreciate you flagging it. If you have any ideas on like nudges, that would be great too.
Yeah, I definitely do.
Yeah, I see something from Galen saying good to reiterate those guidelines in the repost. Yeah, it makes sense. I think it'd be good to just even have them at the bottom of the readmes. We could make them part of like disclosure agreements. So like when you sign up to do something in the community, just like be reminded that, this is what you're signing up to comply with.
Yeah.
Cool. Any other thoughts, calls, questions, concerns? I see a couple people had to hop.
I was thinking about something lately about, I think we would benefit from having like an open system that other companies can integrate with and play the role of at least some part of what the governance team is doing, similar to what certifications or compliance consulting companies do today. So we would have to figure out like the business model for that, because it can be like free, but because I think we want the governance team and the notaries to do too much. At least that's what I think.
Yeah,
it's just too much. We gotta like figure out ways of offloading that, outsourcing, and like maybe creating new markets for those kinds of companies, like certifications, or analyzing applications and whatnot. Because otherwise, if you happen to grow from the number of notaries and applications we have now for to like 1,000 notaries or applications, how can we deal with that with in-house staffing? It's just too much. We gotta figure out some way of offloading that.
I think for what it's worth, it's unlikely that the process will stay this way long term. I think that a lot of these are like, while we're still bootstrapping a little bit, learning a little bit about like making sure things happen in a safe way, gathering more information about the different use cases, and building almost like ad hoc, like reactive processes to ensure that like we're covering as many cases as possible. I made this comment in the morning call, so I may as well state it here too. I think that longer term, the direction that we should be thinking about moving in is like just much less human in the loop interaction when it comes to getting data cap out there. and much more human in the loop interaction when it comes to like abuse of that data cap. And so we've talked about this before, where it's like evolving the roles of like notaries to go from like gatekeepers to being guardians. And it's kind of that idea that like as we start to build a much better like abuse detection muscle, as well as like consequences for that abuse, so like where the tooling for removing data cap from a client address like is a part of that. But maybe there's like a flip in the future of like removing quality adjustment from a sealed sector, like things like that. We can start to get much lighter weight with the upfront human interaction required to get somebody moving and get somebody that data cap, and then over time, based on the information being collected on their behavior on chain and their deal making patterns and stuff, bring in that involvement and like do more of a push notification based thing where it's like, hey, this application requires like a additional like notary involvement, like would you be able to do that kind of thing, as opposed to the default model today, which is like, okay, goes into a massive stack, eventually like somebody from the governance team like validates that it's in English and the questions have been answered, then goes into another massive stack, eventually like some notary comes along and signs a bunch of like proposals. And so I think we have a lot of changes to come to the process still. I share your concern that if the process doesn't evolve, this will be hell and we'll have to find more scalable patterns to do it. But I think as a result of us scaling up the operation, as a result of more people getting involved, I think that the design of the system itself will also evolve drastically. And so hopefully this will actually not be a challenge, a year or two from now.
Yep.
Yeah, Meg's shouting the words in chat. +1. She said it once, she said it 1,000 times. Okay, that's my joke for the day.
Camera was already off, but if it wasn't, I would turn it off again.
Sweet. Well, it feels like we're reaching kind of a natural pause. So feel free to stick a hand up, chat, or just unmute your mic. Otherwise, I just posted the link in chat. If you joined a few minutes late, please fill out that Airtable. We'll get you all pinned up. If you're new and you want someone to reach out, that'd be the way to do it on that form. We had one applicant. This was an LDN that wanted to be on the radar for any of the notaries. So it's iPoloverse, and the LDN is 538. I'll link this in the application review as well as post in the notary channel later this evening. And essentially what they're looking for is their bot sign, their Suede notary review. They prepared a short 5-minute video to answer any maybe high-level questions you have about their project. So I'll link that again in the application review. But if you were looking for an LDN, these folks are obviously taking the time and looking to be heard. So thank you.
Carrie, I think Augustine Ipolo is actually here. I see somebody from Ipolo. If there's any questions for that client right now or that project from the notaries in-house, please flag. Good time to bring it up. The URL is, you have to add in, yeah.
It's 538.
I dropped it in the chat too.
Oh, I appreciate that.
Yep.
Apoloverse, would you like to say anything? Otherwise, I'll close this down and let everyone look async. All right. With that, I think this is going to be one of those rare governance syncs where we have a few minutes left on the agenda. If you want to message any of us offline, feel free to ping us on Slack. And if there's anything that came up that you didn't want to talk about, we'll be happy to discuss in more detail. Otherwise, appreciate you guys all dialing in. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, folks.